Hi, I'm Arthur, and hey guys, you want to feel some existential dread? You just really want to get messed up and feel that weird pit in the bottom of your stomach because you have to contemplate your own existence and your ever-shortening mortality? Well, this is the video to do it on. Gotta funnel you bastards early, so yeah, there is one constant in the universe, and that is everything ends. The rocks turn to dust, the trees turn to splinters, everyone dies and withers at some point. We don't ever truly disappear because the things that make us up are always going to be around, but what we are now changes a lot over time. I know, existential and already getting into my regular old pseudo-intellectualism, but I kinda got asked a really interesting question at my local LGS recently. As local lore guy, people tend to go to me and ask me random things that they don't know about, and it kind of inspired this video. So I gotta ask you guys, you ever wonder what happens when you die in the 40k setting? It's something that's very common, dying in 40k, if you couldn't tell. To be honest, in the setting, dying sometimes just doesn't happen. It's weirdly uncommon in a weird way, as a lot of things just don't get wasted. So becoming a servitor, becoming a servo skull, or becoming a chaos spawn, sometimes dying just doesn't happen. But what happens when it does? People have been confirmed to have a soul in this setting. Hell, some souls are stronger than others. There is a lot of mentions of various afterlives for various people, and I did do some pretty decent digging, but it seems like there is a lot of very different answers. There is good, there's bad, there's incredibly ugly, and then there is being a Nurgal worshipper and dying, which does not lead to anything good, but we'll get there. I kind of want to cover how death and dying works in 40k, but in order to do that, I kind of got to cover what dying was like before things kind of went to shit. It'll make sense what I mean by that in a second, but did you know that chaos kind of ruined dying? Yeah, it gets complicated, but before we hop into it, I just want to say, if you liked the video, make sure to like the video. Subscribe if you like me and you like these videos. Leave a comment to tell me how stupid I am, and let's jump into the pit. To get it out of the way, your psychic essence is basically your soul. All living things that aren't artificial are made up of that kind of essence. Think of it as a living manifestation of your will, power, and desire. The stronger your will, the stronger your soul. Some people have a connection to the warp, which allows them to harness the power of it more. This is what we call a psyker. They are strong souls who are able to pull more psychic essence out of the warp, which is dangerous because the warp is literally a collective of floating soul material that makes up a bunch of people. It's weird. From how I understand it in every text that I've read, the warp isn't really a specific location. It's more of a mirror reality where spiritual energy goes that overlays our own. Emotions, psychic energy, and desires manifest if they are strong enough in there. So when people die, plainly speaking, they go there. Their souls are swept up into the warp, as that is where this energy is released. Now, depending on the time period, that is either horrible or not nearly a big deal. See, the problem with this is basically the concept of heat death. I know, a bit out of nowhere, but we'll get there. See, whenever a chemical reaction happens, one of the most common byproducts of that reaction is heat. So, heat is the final form of most energy in regards to most chemistry. This leads to what is referred to as ambient heat. Heat appears and floats around and dissipates. Now, because the universe is theoretically infinite, I guess it could be and it couldn't be, but we will never notice it because it's only very minuscule amounts and it floats away and things stay cool, but it doesn't go anywhere. It stays. That ambient heat is there, and there is ways to reduce heat, endothermic reactions and so on, but it is rare. Basically, the heat death of the universe happens because there is no more room for ambient heat to disperse, and because of that, it'll kind of cook everything, making life impossible, and thus everything is wiped until the universe does another big bang, boom, and we're so fucking back. This logic applies to the warp. Basically, in the beginning, when there weren't that many people with powerful souls dying, the warp really wasn't that crowded. There wasn't that many ambient souls floating around. Sure, there were some parts of the warp you don't go to, you know, where it's a little bit crowded, but there were, in the lifespan of humanity's existence, some people who could pluck their souls out of the warp and reincarnate to preserve information. This is kind of how the Emperor worked back in the day, but that's neither here nor there. The warp back then was like diving into a deep pool with a bunch of people and fish. You could swim around it if you knew what to do, and if you wanted to, with the help of someone on the edge of the pool who hadn't jumped in yet, you could be pulled out. But if you didn't, you would sink to the bottom and basically just be a part of the ambient scenery, eventually being eroded away into the water. The Eldar were basically immortal because of this. Unless a god consumed them or their spirits were destroyed, they would just revive indefinitely and live pretty chill lives because of it. Most entities that died could come back, and, although the ability to bring people back was, uncommon, it did happen. But that heat death of the universe thing I mentioned? Yeah, the spirit death of the warp kind of happened. Well, the funny thing about death and dying is you can never really make it go the other way. You can't reduce it permanently in one direction, and people just keep dying. There is no way to decrease the amount of people who have died overall anymore. And now imagine this same pool, but it is so filled with people that you can barely see the water anymore, and all of them are fighting and grabbing onto each other to try and get out. The walls on the side of the pool are so high now that it's impossible for them to reach out unless a very specific set of conditions are met. If you fall into this pool, they will grab onto you for a moment's gasp at trying to get out. And if they grab onto you, you get pulled down to the bottom, where you will start doing the same. Think crabs in a bucket kind of way. This is kind of what the warp became. It became so full of ambient psychic energy after a time that revival and resurrection became impossible, because opening up a portal to the warp to pull a soul out meant that you were basically allowing people who were trapped in this crowded area an opportunity to leave, which is very dangerous. The pool water, or what was left of it, became so turbulent that it was almost impossible to navigate without the proper shielding and even see clearly through. Now, with all that ambient energy flowing around, you also had things appearing that were built for the warp, these predators. Entities made from psychic desires, or just something that evolved to feed off of the psychic ambient energy that was in there. They would feed on souls and evolved to be pretty good at this. So dying meant you may actually become prey to some psychic predator, and some of that energy would find ways to break through reality from time to time and create cross-dimensional predators like the enslavers. But after a while, there were these small rotted areas. In a lot of Eldar texts, they're described as these cankers on reality, as emotions from individuals would collect into specific pockets of reality. Things flow in one direction. Spirits of a like-minded energy would kind of collect, and this is what ended up creating the first of the Chaos Gods, and eventually all of the Chaos Gods. The Eldar were a bit specific, as they opened up a Chaos God all at once, and it was pretty crazy, but regardless, with the opening of Chaos Gods, they now have the goal of getting more and more souls and expanding their dominion throughout the entirety of the warp. The Realm of Chaos is one specific part of the warp. It is a large spot that is constantly getting bigger as they get more power. So Chaos Demons go out and try to consume as many souls as humanly possible, which is why it's not cool to open up the warp anymore, because if you do so, one, someone is going to try and claw their way out of the hellscape that the warp is now and try and find a way to survive in our world, fish out of water style, or Chaos Demons are going to be jumping into real space because they're on the hunt for more souls, and the quickest way to do that is to send you off to the afterlife. Death before warp crowding and chaos was what made it possible for things like the Eldar to prosper and the Emperor to become the Emperor. If I remember correctly, the current, what is recognized as potentially canon for the Emperor's birth, was a bunch of shaman, ancient super psychics that existed on Earth, realized that through a mixture of foresight and just being able to read the warp, that there was some bad shit coming over the horizon. So using their psychic abilities, they decided to combine into one mega being, the ultimate psyker, that was able to see the future and basically plan something out for mankind in order to try and save them. This is also what led the Eldar, as I mentioned, into being so debaucherous, as they just didn't care. With no stakes to death and dying, why would they care if someone got split into two? You just make a new body and then pull the person's soul out of the warp and put it back in it. This ended up creating Slaanesh, which sucks. And unfortunately, none of that can happen anymore. Chaos is here. Warp crowding is literally at such a critical mass that the Eye of Terror is a thing that is bleeding ambient energy into the universe. Warp storms happen when things get a little bit too clustered. So now that we have all the basics kind of covered and how terrible things are in the modern setting and how they're probably never going to get any better unless we kill chaos, which is not going to happen, but we can kind of get into what death and dying is like in the modern setting of 40k. I want to discuss what happens when someone dies, and I kind of wanted to discuss the cases that I think are cool. I'll try to keep it in sort of a loose format of the best ways to die, all the way going down to like the worst eventualities once the light leaves your eyes. But before I get into it, I do have a brief intermission really quickly. I just gotta bring something up really fast. While we talk about things that are either dead or dying, I gotta admit something a bit annoying to you guys. My PC is on the way out. It's like dying and pretty fast. The thing is basically reaching a little over 10, maybe 15 years old now, so I'm shopping around for a new one soon. And if you know anything about me, I'm basically tech illiterate. I've been low-key relying on my laptop to kind of carry the day here while I'm looking around. So trying to find a new PC that suits my desires and specs is pretty tough because I don't know much. So when Apex Gaming PCs reached out to me initially, I was kind of overjoyed. And now that they are back to partner with this channel, I gotta say, it feels nice to know I'm covered. Having a wide array of pre-built and custom-built PC options, Apex Gaming PCs is likely going to be where my next PC comes from, as everything is just so readable and easy to understand from my perspective as someone who doesn't know that much about PCs. And Adepticon kind of obliterated my wallet, and that hurt. But if your wallet is a bit tight like mine, then the Apex Bronze might be for you. With some of the best and most affordable parts on the market, you can get this PC and immediately play most games without any hitches. And you won't need to break the bank for it. I'm not here to whisper sweet nothings into your ears and just give them good lip service. If you click my link in the description or pinned comment and use the code Mr. Bones at checkout, you get 3% off your purchase on top of whatever summer sales are going on, which does add up pretty quickly. You can save a pretty decent buck by doing this. You'd also be supporting the channel, which is really good for me and for you because it means I can keep making these videos. So upgrade to an Apex Bronze or maybe even the Apex Streamer from my link. I promise you won't be disappointed and you'll definitely be better off for it. Thanks again to Apex Gaming PCs for sponsoring this channel. When it comes to the best endings in terms of 40k, of, death and dying, there are some weird issues that pop up. One's based around subjectivity. Like, for me, the worst fate imaginable would be something akin to succumbing to Nurgal's rod after being sick for God knows how long and then turning into a plague bearer with super OCD for all eternity. But to the followers of Nurgal, that's just kind of par for the course. So when I state what is the best afterlife for each individual faction, as well as the worst, it's my own opinion, not the opinion of the people in that faction, because like most people in this setting, they kind of enjoy their god-specific afterlife some of the time. Okay, the Eldar don't, but I guess, beggars can't be choosers and all that, har har har. I think if I were to quantify the best afterlives, I would probably have to say it's just like people who get what they wanted and their wants are very, very conservative, I guess. There's like 3 or 4 factions that I think kind of get the good ending when they pass on, and that's orcs, the Leagues of Votann, corn demons and cultists, I guess. Listen, the short list of getting what you want when you die is pretty short, but I think those 3 are like the best examples. I guess the Tau count too, but we will get there. Orcs probably get the best ending of all, because orcs probably have their own afterlife that is as simple as their own existence. I'm surprised there isn't really any mention of an orky heaven in the warp, or at least an orc section of the warp, as it's kind of weird because orcs have pretty powerful souls off rib, just they are creatures of almost pure psychic energy. With that in mind, they have created some pretty powerful gods, and these gods have likely made it so that there is an orky heaven of some sort awaiting for them, and I can literally just assume it's just brainlet Valhalla, where they are basically just full sprint into a fight with a bunch of orcs that never tire and never die forever. They are also likely the reason why orc psychers have so much energy to pull from. It's pretty neat. The Leagues of Votann have probably the second best afterlife, mainly because, again, they're pretty conservative with what they want. They have essentially just made their own afterlife. When a kin dies, they are reabsorbed into the Votann, their bodies being disassembled and reused for raw parts, their knowledge and biomass being stored inside the Votann to create more kin, and also to inform the Votann on different topics that they may not know. They essentially get put into an artificial warp stream of consciousness type of deal, where their minds intermingle with the minds of the billions that had died before them. Though due to there being so many now, the Votann are slowly going senile, which has a very limited level of treatment to it. I know in lore there is a kindred league, I believe it is the Trans-Hyperion Alliance, who split their Votann into 3 smaller heads, which are able to absorb the weight of knowledge that comes from a dead kin's body a little bit more efficiently without them losing their mind as much, but that isn't a permanent solution. But yeah, it's exactly what the kin want. No real strings attached, so it is one of the best ways to be sent off. And Khorne people, yeah, just go read what I said about the orcs, but make it bloodier, meaner, and with more fire and skulls. They don't really truly die though, the demons at least. You just go off and fight in this bloody arena, and if you're worshipping Khorne, fighting in a bloody arena is kind of what you want. Yeah, you just like close your eyes, die on the battlefield, wake up back in some other battlefield in the middle of the warp, and it's just business as usual, I guess. The Tau, well, their souls are so weak that they really don't impact the warp, so they likely don't get swept up in it as much, and it is confirmed that there is a minor warp entity that is created involving the greater good, kind of like a minor warp demigod. It was basically the creation of the more psychically inclined races that believed in the greater good as a concept, and also worshipped it as a god. There are some Tau that took that personally, I will admit, but I doubt it gives them any special attributes in the afterlife, so they just kind of just strike it neutral and go off into nothingness, I guess. So those are kind of the best fates, or at least the most understandably positive ones. It's weird, but in general, the more neutral leaning fates are usually just something like you die, or are turned into an energy that is also a nutritional source for some other larger creature that you're not going to really notice it anyway. Like, for most of humanity, worshipping the Emperor doesn't really keep you from being absorbed back into the warp, or turn into a maelstrom of fucking nothing lightning. But for people who do become weird warp ghosts, Space Marine Psychers who have more control over their psychic energy do have the ability to exert their will in the warp in the afterlife a little bit more, though not nearly as much as you'd hope. Though also, there are some weird cases, like blanks. Weird. I don't ascribe to the idea that they are people that don't have souls. I ascribe to the idea that they are psychers who have a 1 in a billion ability that kind of interacts with the world in a different way that other psychers do. It was kind of confirmed that they do have souls in the Horus Heresy. There was like a bunch of short stories that were released. I believe it was called The Voice. And there was a Sister of Silence who went back in time by selling her soul to a bunch of powerful warp demons in order to carry a message to her younger self, who was then promptly killed by her superiors because they don't want to listen to whatever some sister in the future has to say who had to sell her soul to come back because, that's a little weird. But yes, that does prove that Sisters of Silence do have a soul to sell, which is horrifying, and I don't know what that means for if they die and go to the warp. Is there just like a blank pocket where they show? I don't know, man, it's weird. But yeah, most of the Imperium, if they aren't consumed, mind, body, and spirit into the Emperor, they just kind of go into nothingness or become a part of the warp. Tyrannids, kind of the same thing, really. But Tyrannids don't really have a use for souls. The only reason they do is to fuel the weirder psychic bugs like the Maleceptor or the Zoanthropes. Though the Zoanthrope gets its soul hunger from a weird spot, as its DNA is mostly from Eldar stock, and as we know, Eldar are weirdly good at manipulating soul magic, I guess. But yeah, the Tyrannids, weirdly enough, do the same thing as the Leagues of Votann, but like more evil, I guess. They consume the bodies of their fallen and recycle them. There is a point to be made that the Tyrannids don't have souls in general, and they are just weird flesh amalgamation automata that fire off of nothing more than just chemical stimuli in their bodies. The only real soul being the hive mind itself, but I am not here to argue the philosophical ramifications of Dutermagant's dream of buggy sheep. I'm here to discuss, does the everlasting dream of death's voiceless embrace have a sound itself, or is it just a dull note of banal simplicity? The answer is I don't king, no? But Tyrannids eat a bug and make it a more bugs in response, which is they're pretty neutral if you were a bug that died and became a bug that's not dead anymore. Necrons just go into nothingness as they don't have souls. They're just automata with really complex engrams that allow them to mimic their former lives. Though comically enough, speaking of automata, you want to hear some shit-ass, poo-ass theory that I kind of have been like rattling around my brain a little bit about what happens when an Adeptus Mechanicus member dies? Yeah, I bet you do. I think their soul gets consumed by the void dragon that exists on Mars. No joke, I think that happens because, well, Catan consumes souls to get stronger. The Martian cult was installed on Mars to become influenced by the dragon, and there is rituals of turning people into multicolored ash in the room that's preceding the dragon, which I don't know if we ever get that explained, but like, you know. Also, don't know if you guys ever knew this, but the dragon that is on Mars is kind of the best Eldritch horror I've ever seen in 40k. They're literally pulling like a Yellow King thing here, where every time you see the dragon or hear it's mentioned, it's referred to as both a person, a place, a noun, and a thing. It's weird. But regardless of my schizo babble, the most neutral you can kind of strike it is just doing what is expected of you, or just going into nothingness. Some factions do have it better than others, but quite a lot of factions have it pretty bad. Though I will state, all of the Eldar factions have pretty all over the place death conditions. Like, we will talk more about them later, but they do have a decent ending if they choose to, which is if they die, their soul gets put into a spirit stone and those stones are reclaimed. They can either become a wraith construct and fight forever, which is not the best, but they can also be reclaimed, plugged into the infinity circuit, and then they're just big chillin' for the rest of their life. They live in this artificial afterlife and engage in a peaceful world for all time, unless they get destroyed or come back as a wraith construct, as I mentioned. Kind of the same shit with Harlequins, who just die, just get put in a funny mask, I guess, and they are then taken care of by the laughing god or some shit. Drukhari, yeah, they just don't die, so there really isn't an artificial afterlife for them. There is just a really shitty ever existence that kind of propagates them forward. Like, they just have the ability to resurrect almost infinitely, so most Dark Eldar just keep coming back no matter how many times you kill them. Though, there are ways to permadeath Dark Eldar, and that's a complicated measure, but whatever. So this was kind of all the neutral and or positive death states that you can enter if you were in the 40k setting. Now we're going to cover the worst ones that you could possibly have, and you might notice that we haven't touched any of the chaos factions yet. Oh gee, I wonder why that is. So sit down and let's talk about how bad it is to be a chaos cultist, except for Khorne for some reason. And yeah, let's just hop into that. To say the worst afterlife in 40k is probably a toss-up is not exactly an understatement. Theoretically, most of Chaos is all kind of under the same umbrella, with just various different gradations of kinda shitty. In general, if you worship Chaos, there is basically two little switches that get flicked. Number one, your soul is now forfeit to the Chaos God or gods of your choosing, and two, if you displease them, they can usually take your soul without much worry, living or not. What happens if, while on the battlefield, you die and you are branded with the Mark of Chaos? Well, it really depends. As I said earlier, if you die under the surface of Khorne, at worst, you just become a skull on his skull throne, and at best, you begin to fight forever in his glory in some eternal soul pit or whatever. But with something like Slaanesh worship, yeah, I'm sorry, you ever see a Hellraiser movie before? It's a lot like that, very, very much pointy things. You will, at best, be consumed by Slaanesh and permanently be a part of their essence as a source of energy to fuel this massive god, and at worst, you will have your soul matter torn apart by demons and used as some portion of a ritual that usually involves the worst shit known to man. It is pretty rough, I will add, if you get got by the Slaaneshi bug, but the price we pay for wanting to gamble for eternity and not having to worry about losing, you know? Then, you have Tzeentch. Now, in accordance to Tzeentchian law, if you die under their service, you will either get the best fate imaginable in the afterlife, or the worst. The best is literally you just immediately get reborn for no reason into the best life you could possibly imagine, because Tzeentch wanted you to involve themselves in some long-term plan that involved you helping a Chaos Lord by inventing some new form of cheese or some shit. Or you will be put into the Tzeentchian equivalent equivalent of the femur breaker for SCP, but for spirits for all eternity, just because it would entertain the blue scribes a bit longer to keep their morale up. There really is no in-between, I should note. Tzeentch worship is fucking terrible, but what else could you expect from the worst thought-out god in all of 40k? Now we have Nurgal, which is weird because the last few gods are mostly just speculation, but with Nurgal we do know they have something akin to just basic demonic ascension that doesn't have anything to do with becoming a demon prince. When someone dies of Nurgal's rot, which is the most common disease when you serve with Nurgal, a tree in the garden of Nurgal sprouts another fruit, and that fruit begins to swell and bulge and over-ripen until it explodes, revealing a new plague bearer. This being is bloated with corruption, but this entity is in fact the transmogrified soul of the human who died and is now a full-on demon, believing in Nurgal's gifts and providence. Now, they also are affixed with an obsession with counting, be it the diseases of Nurgal or just some random warts they saw on their favorite frog. They will count incessantly. They have also been known to be weirdly depressed, which kind of makes sense considering, you know, they used to be a people, now they are not. Though there is room for promotions, I will admit. Like, there are named plague bearers who are pretty high in the hierarchy of Nurgal because Nurgal doesn't play favorites. If you came in and put in the effort, he'll think you're pretty chill. Like Sloppity Bilepiper, named plague bearer, kind of a cool dude. But in general, suffering from disease for eternity and being affixed with the worst case of OCD imaginable, if I may sound a wee bit dramatic, sounds like my specific brand of hell. But whatever, man. If you think that sounds great, okay, Asmongold, chill the fuck out, but like, whatever. I mean, there is also the option where you die and your soul is used to create new brews of horrible disease and you can't truly ever be put out of your misery, but you know, most people don't want to talk about that part of Nurgle worship. It's all just high fives and gross hand jobs, but you know what's worse than worshipping Nurgle and then dying in service to them? Chaos Undivided. Imagine all the punishments I just mentioned, but all at once. As someone who worships Chaos Undivided, every slight on a god, every time you pray a little too much to one or too little to another, those get tallied, and when the rent is due, you will pay. When you die, your soul is likely torn apart. And I don't know about you, but yeah, it doesn't sound pleasant. Now, one of my favorite explanations here is, yeah, having your soul torn apart into nothingness, it's going to hurt a lot, but it's not going to hurt for that long because you're just going to disappear into that nothingness. Saying it's not going to hurt for long basically just means you're going to get to say ouch once, which, nah, I don't want my last moments to be that. Oh, and by the way, if you're a psyker who is worshipping Chaos Undivided, you better f***ing look out, because Korn is going to have a word with you about the absolute audacity that some nerd decided to have, thinking that he could worship the god of bloodshed. Inadvertently, I mind you, but still. Your soul will be ground into dust. You will return to nothingness, but you will suffer quite a lot beforehand. See, that is the crux of chaos worship in general. You're trading everything for a chance at having great power. Demonic ascension lays at the end of the path, but it is a long road. True immortality is there. If you succeed, you are eternal. You have more power than you could ever imagine, and you are very much gambling everything for it. It's kind of what a lot of people thought Satanism was for a while, but that is a topic for another day. I know a lot of you were actually interested in me doing a video on occultism, but trust me, that is a door you don't want to open for this channel. But regardless, to wrap up, death in 40k is much like death in the modern world, largely unexplored as to what happens after. I know this isn't how I usually operate in these videos, but if you'll allow me this brief aside, I really enjoy this topic. Fun fact about me, one of my biggest fascinations and biggest fears revolves around death and dying. I enjoy horror, as it makes me feel like I have a modicum of control over understanding life and how it ends. I am someone who really enjoys the macabre, and studying these topics gives me an endless sense of satisfaction. I think death is something that it doesn't matter who you talk to. As an adult, you have an opinion on it. I'm not here to share what my personal beliefs are, because this isn't the forum for me to do so. Whether you believe there's an afterlife or not does not matter to me whatsoever. What matters is that you think about it, and that there is an opinion that you could potentially have on it. Because in all honesty, how we all deal with it is one of the things that defines us as an individual. It's not the only thing. That'd be kind of depressing if the only thing that matters in the end is that we end. But with 40k and the research I did for this video, a lot of what I found could be summed up as the writer writing, yeah, they died, but actually, and then they usually just say something involving how there's not an ending to that story. It continues somehow, some way. It seems very escapist, and I find that to be an interesting display of what death and dying is like in the eyes of some authors. Now, other authors do not do that, but I'm not going to name names. Yeah. 40k media as a whole handles the topic of death and dying in a weird way. You can kind of tell who has dealt with it a lot and who hasn't by the writing. I won't name names, as I said, but when you have experienced a lot of tragedy, you realize that wholesome, oh, they died in your arms saying how much they loved you, and they tell you where they hid the gold under the old oak tree where they used to play, that is a fantasy. When someone dies, it is either so fast that you never get to say everything that you wanted, or it is so slow that you just want it to end. Which is why 40k media has enthralled me a bit, as great writers use death as a state of finality. They don't address what happens after. Now, some do address the aftermath, but I feel it pulls the curtain back a bit too much on the setting and shows the man behind the machine. There is a reason why we don't acknowledge the idea of evil chapter as a thing that is canon to Berserk, but again, I digress. In the end, I think that is why I like what they have written. It's fun to see what they do with such a grim and depressing topic, though that is just me letting the curtain slip a bit on my own. What do you all think is the best example of what happens when you die in 40k? Or even just in fiction? Let me know in the comments, as I'm genuinely curious about what kinds of discussions there are to be had about this specific topic. Now, keep it civil, please. I know I am on a bit of a pseudo-intellectual tear today, but if you will allow me this one time, I think I am warranted this. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. With your help, I am able to get all of this done, pay my editors, not starve, and afford a miniature from time to time as a treat. So if you want to support my channel, support my editors, and continue to see videos like this from me for the foreseeable future, then become a channel member today. You get to see videos early and even 2 extra videos a month. Thanks once again for watching, and tune in next week when we talk about an excessively less depressing topic, like how climate change destroyed the entire world of Terra before the Emperor showed up. Jesus Christ!